£1,300 a month from a £150,000 pension pot. Sounds like a comfortable retirement, right? That figure comes from a very clean piece of arithmetic. You draw 4% a year from your £150,000, which gives you £6,000 a year, £500 a month. Then at 67, your full state pension of £11,502 a year kicks in. Combined, that's roughly £1,458 before tax. After your personal allowance, you keep around £1,300 a month. Neat, tidy, done. Only it isn't done. Not by a long way. That number assumes a world where nothing goes wrong. No surprise bills. No car dying on you in January. No boiler giving up in the middle of a cold February. The calculation is real, but it only tells you what comes in. It says nothing about what quietly walks out the door when you're not watching. I've looked at a lot of retirement plans over the years, and the ones that fall apart rarely do so because the big maths was wrong. They fall apart because of a series of smaller, ordinary expenses that nobody bothered to account for. A dental bill here, a new washing machine there, a roof repair that couldn't wait. So the question isn't really whether £150,000 can produce £1,300 a month. It can. The question is whether £1,300 a month can survive the things real life throws at you at 62. And that's where a lot of people get tripped up. Let's look at why. Before we get to the hidden costs, there's a structural problem that most summaries of this topic skip right over. And if you miss it, the £1,300 figure becomes almost meaningless. You want to retire at 62. The state pension doesn't start until 67. That's a 5-year gap where you're on your own. During those 5 years, your only income is what you draw from your £150,000 pot. At the 4% withdrawal rate the original figure relies on, that's £6,000 a year, £500 a month. That's not a retirement budget. For most people, that barely covers food and utilities. So what actually happens? Most people draw more. They pull out £1,000 a month, or £1,200 or whatever, covers the bills. But every extra pound you take out early is a pound that isn't there when you need it later. And the more you pull out in those 5 years, the smaller your pot is when the state pension finally arrives. The £1,300 figure you see quoted is the number you get after the state pension starts. It's not the number you live on for the first 5 years. This distinction matters enormously, and it's the part that tends to disappear in short summaries. Let's run the actual numbers once the state pension does kick in at 67. The full new state pension in the 2026 to 2027 tax year is £11,502 a year. Your personal allowance is £12,570. If your pot is still large enough to withdraw £6,000 a year by then, your combined gross income is £17,502. That takes you £4,932 over your personal allowance. Tax on that at 20% is just under £1,000 a year. So your net income lands at around £16,500 a year, roughly £1,376 a month. That's reasonably close to the £1,300 figure. The maths is broadly right. But it only works if your pot survives the first 5 years largely intact. If you've been drawing heavily from age 62 to 67, your remaining pot might be £80,000 or less by the time the state pension arrives. At 4% withdrawal on £80,000, you're pulling out £3,200 a year. Add the state pension, and your annual gross income drops to around £14,700. That's still under the personal allowance, so no income tax. But your monthly income is now around £1,225, not £1,376. And that's before a single unexpected expense. This isn't about being bad with money. It's about information that gets left out. The clean version of the calculation starts at 67. Real retirement starts at 62. So the first question to answer isn't whether the long-term maths works. It's how you cover the gap without gutting your pot in the process. A few options exist: part-time work, ISA savings sitting separately, or a phased drawdown strategy that preserves more capital early on. None of them require perfection, but all of them require actually knowing the gap exists. Even if you bridge the gap successfully, there's still another layer to this that the clean calculation ignores entirely, and it tends to be the thing that does the most damage. A pension pot is not a salary. That sounds obvious, but it's a distinction that catches a lot of people off guard in the first year or two of retirement. When you were working, your income arrived every month, regular as the bills. It absorbed the unexpected. Your car needed 4 new tires, fine, you covered it from next month's pay. Your boiler gave out, stressful, but you managed it. In retirement, that buffer is gone. The income is fixed, and the unexpected expenses don't care. This is where the £1,300 figure starts to look very different in practice. On paper, it covers the basics for a single person in a mortgage-free home, but it leaves almost no room for the costs that don't appear on a monthly budget sheet, the irregular, unavoidable ones that show up every few years and demand to be paid in full. Boiler replacement in the UK runs between £2,000 and £3,500, according to Which. A realistic midpoint is around £2,750. That's more than 2 months of your entire income gone in a single bill. A dental crown can cost between £700 and £1,200 privately. A car repair lands between £400 and £1,000 on average. A roof leak that can't wait might be £1,500 or more. None of these are rare events. Every one of them is something a homeowner in their 60s is likely to face within a few years. Think about someone like John. He's 62, single, owns his home outright, and has £150,000 saved. He's planned carefully. He knows the numbers. He starts retirement on roughly £1,000 to £1,200 a month from his pot, more than the strict 4% rate, because £500 a month isn't livable, but less than he'll eventually have once the state pension starts. In year 2, his boiler fails. The repair costs £2,750. He has no separate emergency fund. He assumed his pot was the emergency fund, so he draws it down early, taking out a lump sum on top of his monthly withdrawals. Now his pot is smaller, his future income is reduced, and he's already behind the plan. This sequence plays out with remarkable consistency. It's rarely one catastrophic event. It's 2 or 3 mid-sized ones arriving in the same year, and the pot taking hits it was never properly sized to absorb. I used to think a tight budget was enough, that if you ran the numbers and they worked on paper, you'd be fine. Then I watched a friend's retirement start to fall apart over a £4,000 roof repair. He had the income. He had the plan. What he didn't have was a separate pot set aside for the things the plan assumed wouldn't happen. That changed how I think about retirement budgets entirely. I don't claim to know every detail of your situation, but these patterns are real, and they appear consistently across retiree budgets at this income level. The hidden costs aren't exotic. They're a new boiler, a car that needs attention, a dentist visit that can't go on the NHS list. They're ordinary life, just arriving at a time when the financial cushion is thinner. Across a year, these irregular expenses can quietly consume 20 to 30% of a £1,300 monthly budget. That's £260 to £390 a month that the clean calculation never accounts for. And there's still another variable that makes this even harder to plan for, one that affects renters and homeowners in completely different ways. The same £150,000 pot, the same state pension, the same 4% withdrawal rate. 2 people can arrive at retirement with identical numbers and end up in completely different positions, based almost entirely on one thing, whether they own their home or rent it. If you own your home outright, £1,300 a month is tight, but it's workable for most people outside major cities. A sensible budget might allocate around 20% to home maintenance and running costs. That's about £260 a month, set aside for repairs, insurance, and upkeep. That leaves £1,040 for food, transport, utilities, and day-to-day life. Tight, yes, but manageable as long as nothing large and unexpected arrives too soon. Now take the same person, same pot, same pension, but they rent. According to ONS data, median private rents outside London sit at around £650 a month for existing tenants in a modest property. Subtract that from £1,300 and you have £650 left for everything else. Food, utilities, transport, healthcare, any form of leisure and any savings buffer. That's a genuinely difficult position, and it gets harder over time. Rent rises with inflation. If rents increase at roughly 2% a year on average, the £650 you pay today becomes £792 in 10 years. Your state pension does increase with the triple lock, but your drawdown income is fixed by your pot size, so the real purchasing power of that £650 remainder quietly falls. After a decade, you might effectively have £480 in today's money to live on after rent. That's not retirement, that's survival. A renter on this budget is likely to deplete their pot significantly earlier than a homeowner. The pot that was supposed to last well into their 80s may be largely gone by their early 70s. For homeowners, the picture is more stable, but not risk-free. Owning a home means owning its problems too. An older property carries the costs we talked about in the previous section, and those costs don't announce themselves in advance. Two paths, then. The mortgage-free path is precarious when something expensive breaks. The renting path is precarious almost continuously because the baseline is already so tight. If you're planning to retire at 62 and you currently rent, the £150,000 figure is not a comfortable starting point. It may not be enough at all, depending on where you live. That's not a reason to despair, it's a reason to plan differently. We'll come back to what that looks like. First, though, there's a risk that applies to both renters and homeowners, and it has nothing to do with bills or boilers. It's to do with timing specifically. What happens to your pot if the market falls in the first couple of years after you retire? There's a risk in retirement that doesn't get nearly enough attention in plain language guides. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it can do serious damage to a £150,000 pot even if you do everything else right. Here's how it works. When you're still saving, a market fall is painful but recoverable. You're still adding money, so you're buying units at lower prices. The sequence of gains and losses across your working life averages out. In retirement, that changes entirely. You're withdrawing, not contributing. If the market falls sharply in the first year or two after you retire, you're selling units at a loss to fund your income. Those units are gone. They can't recover. And the smaller pot that remains has to work harder to keep up with your withdrawals. A 20% fall on £150,000 wipes out £30,000 in value almost overnight. Your pot is now £120,000. If you're still withdrawing at the same rate, you're taking a larger percentage from a smaller base every single month. After 5 years of this, your pot could easily be under £80,000, and that's before accounting for any of the hidden costs or housing pressures we've already discussed. This isn't a hypothetical. In 2008, the FTSE 100 fell by 31%. Anyone who retired in early 2008 and held their pot in a standard diversified fund saw it reduced dramatically in those first months. The people who had a cash buffer, a separate pot that didn't need to be touched during the downturn, rode it out. The people who had nothing set aside were forced to sell at the worst possible moment. This is exactly why the hidden cost sinking fund isn't just about boilers and dental bills, it's also a market buffer. If you have £10,000 in easy access cash set aside before you retire, a market fall in year one doesn't force you to touch your invested pot. You live on the cash while the market recovers. Your pot gets the time it needs. The worst-case scenario is survivable, but only if you've built in room for it before it happens. So what does that actually look like in practice? Let's go through 3 specific things you can do. None of what we've covered so far is meant to put you off retiring at 62. It's meant to give you a clearer picture of what retiring at 62 on £150,000 actually involves, so that the plan you build holds up to real life rather than just the spreadsheet version. There are 4 things worth addressing directly. The first is the sinking fund. Before you retire, aim to have between £5,000 and £10,000 sitting in accessible cash, separate from your pension pot. This covers boiler replacements, car repairs, dental work, and the other irregular costs that don't fit neatly into a monthly budget. The right home for this money is somewhere accessible and stable. A premium bonds account or an easy-access cash ISA both work well. The point is that when something breaks, you don't have to touch your invested pot to fix it. The second is housing. If you own your home, build maintenance into your numbers, rather than hoping nothing major comes up. A rough guide is 1% of your property's value per year set aside for upkeep. On a £200,000 property, that's £2,000 a year, or around £165 a month. If you rent, think seriously about whether your current location is the right one for a fixed income. There are parts of the country where £650 a month in rent is close to the average. There are others where £650 doesn't cover the basics. Geography matters more in retirement than most people plan for. Third is the 5-year gap between 62 and 67. If you can reduce how much you need from your pot during those 5 years, your long-term position improves significantly. One option is part-time work. Even a day or 2 a week at a modest rate can take significant pressure off your pot. Another option is to defer your state pension. Delaying it by 1 year increases it by around 5.8%, according to gov.uk. Delay it by 2 years, and you're looking at around an 11.6% uplift for the rest of your life. That's a meaningful improvement if you can bridge the gap another way. Fourth is the order in which you draw income. Drawing from your ISA first keeps things tax-free. Pension drawdown comes with a 25% tax-free lump sum, so how you sequence your withdrawals affects how much tax you pay over time. The right order depends on your full picture, but the principle is worth understanding before you start drawing. But here's the part that matters most, and it's not about the maths at all. I'm embarrassed to admit that for years I avoided looking at my own retirement projections. Not because I didn't know they existed, but because I was afraid of what I'd find. That feeling is more common than people let on. And it's also the one thing that stops you fixing the problems while there's still time to fix them. If you've been avoiding opening your pension statement, you're not alone, and you're not lazy. There's a well-documented pattern where people who are worried a number might be too low simply stop looking at the number. If you don't check, you can't be disappointed. The problem is that not looking doesn't change anything, it just delays the moment you find out. There's a specific version of this that comes up a lot with the £150,000 figure. The thought goes something like, that's probably not enough anyway, so what's the point in planning? It feels rational. It isn't. It's avoidance dressed up as realism. The shift that tends to actually help isn't a grand overhaul of your finances. It's a much smaller question. Instead of asking, can I retire on £150,000? Try asking, what one cost can I do something about today? Maybe that's opening a premium bonds account for the sinking fund. Maybe it's looking up the state pension deferral numbers and running the maths for your own situation. Maybe it's just writing down what you actually spend each month, including the irregular things, and comparing that number to what your pot can realistically produce. Small actions build momentum, and momentum makes the bigger questions less overwhelming. A plan that's 80% right and actually being followed beats a perfect plan that's never opened. That's not a lowering of standards, it's just how humans work. Once you start moving, the picture becomes clearer, and when the picture is clearer, the decisions are easier. That's where a proper plan starts to come together. So, can you retire at 62 with £150,000? The honest answer is, possibly. It depends on 3 things the headline figure doesn't tell you. First, whether you've built a hidden cost buffer for the irregular expenses that don't appear in a monthly budget. Second, whether your housing situation leaves you enough breathing room at that income level. Third, whether your plan can absorb a difficult market in the first couple of years without forcing you to sell at the wrong moment. None of these are reasons to give up on the idea. They're reasons to go in with a more complete picture. Retirement planning isn't about pretending everything goes according to plan. It's about building enough room that when things don't go according to plan, you're still okay. If this kind of honest, practical look at the numbers helps you, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. I put out a new video every week on the real-world mechanics of retirement in the UK, and I do my best to answer questions in the comments. Your £150,000 can work, but only if you know what it's really up against.